Hey friends, welcome back. This is Ashley with Uncommon Roots Homestead. So today I want to talk about how do you start your first sourdough starter. Okay, so we have all heard of sourdough. You already know I'm obsessed with my sourdough. I've shared some recipes. I've shared what we do with our sourdough discard. I've shared how I feed my sourdough, but I haven't talked about how I started my sourdough starter. So one of the things that I think is so cool about sourdough is it's something that has a lot of history and ancestry and legacy. I think that it's so cool that you can have a sourdough starter that's literally passed down for generations. You can eat a piece of sourdough bread that has active living yeast in it that has been alive for hundreds of years. I think that is so cool. That's such a legacy thing, and you can't find that too often. But not everybody knows someone who has a sourdough starter, right? So there are a couple of different ways to first get into sourdough. You can find a friend who has a sourdough starter, ask them for a little bit of theirs. Everyone who cooks with sourdough has discard because you continue to feed it and it gets bigger and bigger and bigger, and eventually you would be using like pounds of flour and water every time that you fed your starter. So obviously you get rid of some, so it makes a great opportunity to give some away, share it with friends, things like that. But you might not know anybody who has a sourdough starter. I didn't. 2 years ago, I started reading a lot about sourdough. I was reading about how great it was for you, kind of the benefits of having that gluten be broken down through long fermentation and how that was easier for our bodies to digest. And I really love sourdough, and I just felt like it was really cool. It's cool to be able to have something that's a little bit more sustainable than, you know, running to the store for a package of yeast. So I needed to figure out how do you start a sourdough starter. I didn't have one. I knew that I could buy one online. That felt a little bit sketchy to me. Now I know that there are a lot of places, a lot of really great influencers who will sell you some of their starter. That's definitely a great option if you come across someone like that. But if you don't have that, there are a couple of different ways that you can actually start a sourdough starter. So there are three primary ways. The first is to use water, flour, and store-bought yeast to start your first starter. And that kind of kickstarts the process. You end up getting those bubbles. I didn't want to go that route. You know, it's kind of the purist in me, I guess. I felt like that was cheating. So I wanted to figure out, like, can I get this yeast to kind of create itself out of nothing? And so that's why I didn't go with that route. The second is to use some kind of a fruit that ferments and has a lot of those natural yeasts. That's a really great option. A lot of people do that. For me, that felt way too complicated. I did some reading on it and was just like instantly overwhelmed. So if you have read about it and you feel that way too, then this video is for you, because I'm talking about the way that I started my sourdough starter that is about 2 years old now. I actually just fed it. I haven't named mine, which I'm recently finding out that that's a thing. Like, you should name your sourdough starter. It's just been like freeloading here, no name, but I just fed mine. So mine is pretty huge right now. You'll see I marked where it was when I fed it. So then tomorrow it'll be pretty much up to the rim. So it'll about triple in size. And the sourdough starter that I have is 2 years old, like I said, and right now it's a 100% einkorn fed sourdough starter. So I already have that one. I'm not gonna be using it today. I'm not gonna be cheating. I'm going to be starting from scratch so you can follow along. I will record this video every single day for the next 5 days. So getting down to what that third option is and what that means. So the third way, and the way that I'm talking about today, making a sourdough starter, just requires four things. Really two, but four if I'm being practical. So first, you need a container. I'm just gonna use a quart-sized mason jar. I like to use glass for a couple of reasons. First, you can see. So you wanna be able to watch and see the bubbles. You wanna be able to see if it actually is rising. It's really easy to like mark with a rubber band or a dry erase marker like I do my actual starter, or not actual, this is gonna be an actual starter too, but anyways, you can mark it. It's really easy to see. And also the glass is, it prevents different bacteria. It's not porous. So I don't worry about anything like that. So the glass. The second thing that is not 100% necessary, but if you've seen any of my other sourdough videos, I highly recommend a kitchen scale. So, I mean, you can get these cheap, like $8 on Amazon. I picked this one up at Target and I think I paid like $9.99. I will tell you, having a kitchen scale has changed my sourdough game. It makes everything easier, especially when you start kind of dabbling in different flours. I think I said on one of my last videos, now that I'm using einkorn almost exclusively, einkorn is so light. It's really, really delicate, and it's not like 1 cup of einkorn is not equal to 1 cup of all-purpose flour. So using a weight system actually makes everything way easier. So I recommend using a kitchen weight. So the third thing that you need is flour. So I have a mill. I do mill my own grains. That's how I do my einkorn. But for this purpose, what I actually want, something that's practical for me, because I already have a sourdough starter, I wanna have a all-purpose flour starter. There are some things that I bake that having a 100% einkorn starter is not always ideal for. We're not exclusively einkorn eaters. We do mostly eat einkorn. It's really easy to digest. There's so many benefits. I'll have to do a separate video on why I love einkorn. It's high protein, low gluten. I mean, it's just really great. And it's an heirloom grain, which I absolutely love. But back on track. I'm using all-purpose organic flour for this starter, and then water. A lot of people say you only want to use filtered water. I'm just gonna be real. I use my tap water. I've always used it. It works really well. My sourdough starter is amazing. So I'm gonna use that today because I think that as real and as simple as we can keep it, the better. So what I'm gonna do and how you do this is it takes 5 minutes each day for about 7 days, and then you'll have an active sourdough starter. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna do 4 ounces of water and 4 ounces of flour. I'm gonna mix it together, and again, I'm gonna weigh those, so that's how I'm going to get those measurements. I'm gonna mix it together, I'm gonna let it sit, and then tomorrow, I'm gonna again do 4 ounces and 4 ounces. The third day, 4 ounces, 4 ounces. The fourth day, 4 ounces, 4 ounces. On the 5th day, I'll actually discard half of it and do 4 ounces, 4 ounces, and that is the day I should see it double in size. So in 5 days, you go from flour and water to an active sourdough starter, and it seriously is that easy. I have done this a couple of times, and it's always worked out. So we're gonna do it together, and I'm going to get my all-purpose organic sourdough starter started. So let's do it. Okay, so it is that simple. So after you have mixed it up, and I need to start a little bit better. You don't wanna have any flour like that. But after you mix it up, it looks like this. It's kind of like a loose dough. It'll just smell like flour and water. I used a baby spoon to mix it. People say don't use metal. I have used metal spoons with my sourdough starter and not had any reaction with the yeast, but I generally will just grab like a silicone or a baby spoon like this if I need to. So once you've gotten that all mixed up and good, you're just going to keep it in a relatively warm place. The best is gonna be between 70 and 75 degrees Fahrenheit. It is November here in Tennessee, and we do not keep our house at 70 degrees in the winter, so it's about 65 degrees. That's gonna be fine. So what I'm gonna do is just cover this. I'm actually gonna use like a beeswax wrap, and I will cover the top of it. And then tomorrow, about 24 hours from now, So about 8 o'clock tomorrow, I'm going to go ahead and feed it again. So I'm just gonna keep adding to this. I'm not gonna discard anything for those first 5 days. And by day like 3 or 4, I should see like a lot of good bubbles and it should be getting really active. So we will do this together and we'll see what we have tomorrow. To show you all what day 3 should look like. So you should start to see, sorry, the lighting is kind of bad. You should start to see some little bubbles. I've already fed this, which you've seen. It's gonna rise a little bit, but not a ton. But this is what it looks like on day 3. All right, here we are at day 4. This is gonna be before I have fed it. Yeah, so you can see it's really nice and bubbly. It's kind of foamy on top. You can see I've got some air bubbles here. So let's go ahead and feed it. Tomorrow we should see a little bit more of a rise. Okay, so some questions that we get a lot, and the reason I'm actually making this video is that people are confused. How do you know if your sourdough starter is good? If you're making it for the first time, how do you know that it's actually working? How do you know you're cultivating good bacteria, not bad bacteria? And what's it supposed to smell like? What's it supposed to look like? So this is day 4. I just fed it. I showed you what it looked like before I fed it. So after feeding it, I'll show it to you in just a second, but I'm already getting some really good bubbling activity in the next couple of hours. This is really gonna start to foam up and really kind of take on a little bit more life. In the next couple of days, I would expect it to actually start growing in size as well. But I wanna get down to smell because that's something that I think is really hard to grasp, and I'm not even sure that this is gonna help a lot. I'm gonna try my best to articulate the smell. So today on day 4, it still smells a lot like flour. So I'm not getting any rotten smell. I'm not getting anything rancid. I'm getting a little bit of like a sweet but slightly sour undertone, but it's not overwhelming at all. It's just a little hint of something, and that's the yeast. So if you ever use nutritional yeast or you've used any kind of yeast, you know, yeast has a little bit of a yeasty smell, I guess you would call it. And that's evident in this right now on day 4. So I'm gonna go ahead and cover it, and then we'll check in and show you what it looks like tomorrow, and I'll hopefully we'll see some rising and we'll see those yeast really start to strengthen. And I'm guessing that in the next 2 days, we'll be ready to do the float test. Hey friends, okay, it is day 5 with our sourdough starter. I'm gonna show you what it looks like. It is, let's see, zoom in there. So it's very frothy. It has a really, it's starting to get like really sour vinegar smell. And so on day 5, we are almost there. It would not quite pass the float test yet, but we're getting really close. So I don't want to bulk it up anymore. So instead of just continuing to feed it and let it get bigger and bigger, what I'm actually going to do is I'm going to start going to a 1-1-1 ratio. So there are a lot of different ways to feed and maintain your sourdough starter. I like the 1-1-1 method. It's really simple. It just means equal parts of your starter, flour, and water. So Isla is going to help me with that. And we're gonna go ahead and see how it goes. So I'm gonna do probably 1 cup of each and we'll get started. Welcome back, or I guess we're in the middle of a video, so I'm tired. It's 8:30 on a Sunday night, and this is the last time I am going to feed this starter. I think it is about ready to go. So I'll show you what it looks like. The smell today, we're on day 6. It's very sour, very vinegary, and it's very active. So I'm getting a lot of foam. Those are all great things. Whenever you are making your sourdough starter for the first time, if you smell anything along the lines of vinegar, that is a good thing. So I know a lot of people are like, well, what is it supposed to smell like? Does it smells a little sweet, it smells a little sour? Like what does correct sourdough smell like? If you get hints of vinegar, that's a good thing. So it should be sour with a little bit of hint of vinegar. So I'll show you what it looks like and then we'll go ahead and feed it. So this is what we're looking at here on day 6. So you can see it's hungry. I haven't fed it since yesterday. So those darker areas, that's just, it's starting to separate. So if I were to put this in the fridge, it would actually separate more and you get like almost a layer of like hooch on top, which is like, I don't know, it smells very liquory, but I just mix it in. You can pour it off, but it's not harmful. So you can see it's very active. I'm getting a lot of bubbles. You can see I've got some activity in the side here too, and I've got that layer starting to form on top. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna go ahead and I'm going to do about a half a cup of each again, and then we should be good to go. So I know it may be a little bit confusing. When I feed my sourdough starter, I do everything, my active or my 2-year-old sourdough starter, I do everything by weight now. I used to just measure it by quantity, and then I switched to weight. I mostly started doing that because I'm using einkorn flour with my, I guess original, the OG starter that I have. It's 100% einkorn fed now. And einkorn flour is very light. So if I were to do this with einkorn flour and I was just gonna do, half a cup of each, it was gonna be really, really wet, because half a cup is roughly equal to X amount of grams with traditional flour. With einkorn, it's gonna be much lower. So that's why I weigh everything. I have read a lot, there's a lot of conflicting views. Should you always weigh? Should you never weigh? I think that when you've been baking with sourdough long enough and you've been feeding your sourdough starter long enough, you kind of just fall into a rhythm, and there's not a wrong way to do it. I think that it can be really, the world of sourdough can be both very welcoming and engaging, and it can also be super intimidating because people come in and they're, with X number of stretches and folds, and you have to, what's the hydration percentage? And I mean, you can just get really crazy. And I am not here for that. I am here for good bread. So as long as my sourdough starter has active yeast that's beneficial, that is rising, that's all I'm looking for. I'm looking for long fermentations to break down the gluten and delicious bread. So that is hard to mess up, I've found. Some people overcomplicate the art of sourdough. And I mean, I am by no means a sourdough expert. There are people who are way better at sourdough than I am. But I will say that my sourdough starter works perfectly fine. When I use it, everything that I'm putting it in rises, it doubles, it triples, it gets bigger, it tastes delicious. I get a good crumb. I mean, it's take it or leave it. So all of that to say, it's a little conflicting, I know, because when I'm starting this, as I was the first 4 days that we talked, I measured everything. And then yesterday I went ahead, I measured by weight. And then yesterday I measured by volume. And I know that that's confusing. I kind of switched gears halfway through. I find that when you get to this stage, that becomes easier because I'm using all-purpose white flour. It's the way I did it originally, and I feel like it works really well. There's not a problem with continuing to weigh by measurement at this stage. I'm gonna be honest, I just didn't pull up my scale yesterday, so I did it by volume, and I'll probably do it by volume again today. But there's no problem doing it either way. So your starter can have different levels of hydration depending on how you are feeding it. So as long as it stays active and healthy, it doesn't really matter how you do it. So all that to say, I'm going to go ahead and I am going to do 1/3 of a cup flour, water, starter, and I'm gonna actually mark it today. So I'm gonna mark my container and we'll see tomorrow how much it's risen. everybody, it is day 7 of our sourdough starter. So yesterday I was pretty sure that I wasn't gonna need to feed it again before it was ready, but it rose a little bit, but it didn't quite double. So I'm gonna go ahead and I'm gonna show you what the float test looks like. And then if it doesn't float, we know that we need to actually feed it again. So at this point, when you're around 7 days and it is really bubbly and it's starting to smell sour, if it's not floating, what I'll usually do is attribute that to the temperature of my house. So it's cold, we're getting into fall, we keep the house in the 60s. So it's definitely not warm in here. So what I think I'm gonna do is actually go to feeding it twice a day and see if I can really amp up that natural yeast in the next day or so. So I'm gonna go ahead and do the float test. If it sinks, which I'm assuming it's going to because it didn't rise quite as much as I wanted it to, then what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna feed it tonight and then I'll feed it in the morning, I'll feed it tomorrow evening, and at that point it really should be ready to bake. So we will cross our fingers and see what happens. But this just goes to show that when you're creating your sourdough starter for the first time, don't give up. So it doesn't matter how many times you've done this, doesn't matter how much you know about sourdough, you still can get to day 7, and if the environment is not perfect, you might need a little bit more time. So be patient. Unless you're growing mold or it just is smelling rancid, you're probably on the right track. So don't give up yet. So let's go ahead and do that float test and then I will feed it. Okay, so in order to do the float test, what we need is our starter and a glass of room temperature water. So you don't want it to be too cold, you don't want it to be too hot, just room temperature. So what I'm gonna do is scoop a little bit of this starter up, and then I'm going to drop it in here. Okay, did you see that? Let's let a little bit more fall. Okay. Okay, do you guys see that? So we are like half of it floated, half of it sunk, and it looks like more of it is sinking now. So when that happens, that means we are not quite ready to bake. But a little bit is floating, you can see. And when I first dropped it, a little bit more was floating. So we're close. I think that I'm right. I think when I feed it tonight, and then I'll feed it in the morning, and then I'll feed it tomorrow evening, and then I think that we will pass the float test. So again, this is day 7. It is a little bit chillier in our home because it is November. So yeah, keep that in mind. There's not like all of these recipes that I've seen online, or when other people talk about creating a sourdough starter, you see like in 5 days you can be baking. That is not always the case. So don't feel bad. Don't feel like you failed just because your starter is not floating on day 7. Mine's not either. So I'm gonna go ahead and feed it, and then we will check back in tomorrow and see if we pass the float test. All right, friends. So we are on day 7. Today is day 7. And you can see I got almost doubled in the rise, and I did the float test. I'm gonna be honest, I did not think that it was gonna float. It didn't. I mean, it smells great. It's a little bubbly, but I just wasn't sure if it was quite there yet, but we are floating. We're starting to sink a little bit now because I did it a couple minutes ago. But yeah, that means that we are ready to try to bake. So what I am going to do is I'm going to take this starter and I am going to start a loaf of bread, and then I'll go ahead and feed it again. I'm actually gonna leave this one out at room temperature. I'm gonna keep feeding it for a little bit to really try to get it strong. And then I also got my einkorn starter out, and I'm going to bake some einkorn rolls for Thanksgiving, which is tomorrow. But yeah, so I've got 2 starters now. Oh, you can see it started to fall and it fell down. So that'll happen. The float test, you just wanted to see it float consistently for like 30 seconds. After that, it's going to start to sink. So I'm not worried about that, but super excited. So that is all that it takes. And again, it was a little bit cold in my house. I did feed it twice today. So I added that extra feed in there to really try to help amp it up and get it a little bit more active, but super exciting. Figured I would turn you guys around since I'm sitting here just talking to you while you're looking at it. But yeah, super exciting. So now what I'm really excited about is now I have a all-purpose flour starter, and then I have my 100% einkorn starter, which is gonna allow me to really keep my starter consistent, and it's not bad to switch up the flour that you use in your starter, but it does take a while for your starter to be 100% einkorn. And so if I wanted to bake a white loaf and I wanted to feed my starter with, you know, regular all-purpose flour, then obviously my starter would not be 100% einkorn, so I'd have to go back, and it's like 5 to 7 feeds before you can get back to that 100% einkorn. So I'm really excited to keep that. Einkorn is really great if you're gluten intolerant. We're not, but it's much better for you. It's a healthier grain. I like the heirloom grain. I like some of the benefits that are in einkorn. It has extra protein. The gluten breaks down a little bit easier. It has less starch than a traditional wheat berry. So there's just a lot of benefits to eating einkorn that we appreciate, but sometimes you just want a good white loaf of sourdough bread. So I'm excited to have a kind of a quote unquote regular starter now too. Well, thanks for joining me. I really appreciate it. I hope that this has been helpful, and I hope if nothing else, it's been encouraging, and that you know, it's not a perfect science. And that's funny because it kind of is a perfect science, but just because someone else got their starter to be active and ready to bake in 5 days doesn't mean that if you're on day 7 or day 10 that your starter is not gonna ever be active. It definitely can happen. You just have to be patient. Like I said, look for those smells, look for those visuals, and then be willing to kind of be patient. And especially if you're doing this in the winter and it's a little bit colder in your environment, it's gonna take a little bit longer for those natural yeasts to really start to ferment and grow. So I wanna encourage you today that if you have not started your sourdough journey, just start. It's really not that hard. And once you have that active starter, there's so much that you can do with it. And it is addicting, let me tell you. Thanks for joining me today. I appreciate it. And if you're not already, find us over on Instagram at Uncommon Roots Homestead. Have a great day.